be on page 28 of your lesson book this morning. We started a new quarter and a new series of lessons last week. This first section, we're going to be in the book of Ecclesiastes for several weeks now. We're going to be looking at finding meaning, the wisdom from Ecclesiastes. Last week was kind of the opening synopsis of what Ecclesiastes is really going to teach us this quarter, and it's talking about when life feels empty, how life is really meaningless without Jesus in our lives. This morning is going to be the problem with pleasure. And as we read through this study, always keep in mind that Solomon is writing this from the perspective that we're leaving God out of our lives. As we look at Ecclesiastes, he starts off in chapter 1, he says, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Vanity means something empty, something meaningless, something void of any real fulfillment in our lives. Apart from God in our lives, life is a vanity. Life is empty.
Amen.
As we go into chapter 2, I want you to keep this in the back of your mind. We've heard it said, and I've even said it, way back a long time ago before the Lord got through my thick head that there's more to life than that. But we've heard it said that if I could just get a little more money, if I could just strike it rich, win the lottery, man, then I could start having fun and I could really enjoy life and I can have pleasure and all these other things. As we go through this section today, keep in mind that Solomon was the richest man in the world. By some accounts, he was taking in about 25 tons of gold every year.
Wow.
In his coffers. So, man, in our day and age, it's probably no different back then. We have this misconception that we can buy happiness.
Yeah.
That we can go on these cruises, we can go see the world, we can have these nice cars and these big homes, and when it gets cold, I'll move down to Florida to my home down there. When it gets hot, I'll move up to the Northeast where it's cool, and I'll just enjoy life and lay back and take my ease. And Solomon says that's not right.
Amen. Right.
Solomon says that don't work. But what he does, and we're going to see this as we start going through this, what he does is he sets out, and I believe this is absolutely, completely God-inspired, to prove to the rest of man how much vanity that really is when we pursue pleasures apart from God. So as we go into our lesson today, it's Ecclesiastes chapter 2, starting in verse 1. He says, I said in mine heart, go to now, I will prove thee with mirth, therefore enjoy pleasure, and behold, this also is vanity. So now a few words I want to point out to you. When he says, I will prove thee, he's talking about he's going to test his own self. He's going to test his heart. He says, he said in mine heart, go to now. So he's given himself permission to explore all these things that man says, apart from God, that man says will bring us joy and pleasure. Mirth is a word that means joy, gladness, happiness, those things that we think we need to complete our lives. Therefore, enjoy pleasure. That word, if you look up the definition of that phrase, it means through first-hand experience. So he's just not going to go to the library and read about other people's pleasure. He's going to go experience it firsthand. Now, keep in mind, he's the richest man in the world. He's probably, in his day, probably the most powerful man on earth also. He had a great kingdom. God had blessed David in his reign. The nation of Israel was a regional power in that day. There's nothing Solomon couldn't explore, nothing he couldn't buy, nothing he couldn't command, nothing he couldn't do to explore all these things that we think brings us pleasure in our lives. But he says, behold, this also is vanity. As I said last week, that vanity, that emptiness, it also carries the idea of a puff of smoke that's gone in an instant. It's here one second, gone the next. When we pursue these things in our lives, when we pursue this so-called joy and pleasure and happiness and all this stuff apart from God, it may satisfy us for an instant, but it's totally temporary. Verse 2 says, I said of laughter, it is mad, and of mirth, what doeth it? So now, according to science, laughter is a good thing. You know, when we laugh, it releases certain chemicals or something in our bodies that not only lift us up in spirit, but it also has a good health benefit to us. You know, it's really a good thing to be happy and joyful and, you know, and laughing and all this stuff. But Solomon says it is mad. That word mad means to make a fool or to act like a madman. It's crazy. So, knowing modern science, knowing that all the doctors out there say that laughter is a good thing, why would Solomon say it's mad? It's crazy. So this is a hard verse for me to wrap my mind around this week when I was doing my studying. But I found a verse, and this is in the book of Proverbs. I'm going to read a passage to you. And this is, Solomon wrote Proverbs also. And so I think he's elaborating on what he's talking about here. He says in Proverbs chapter 14, verses 11 through 13, he says, the house of the wicked shall be overthrown, but the tabernacle of the upright shall flourish. There is a way which seemeth right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. Yeah. Even in laughter, the heart is sorrowful, and the end of that mirth is heaviness. So, apart from God in our lives, when we pursue the pleasures of man, and instead of seeking the permanent joy that God can give us, it's empty. It doesn't relieve our sorrow. It doesn't provide fulfillment for our lives. Have you ever been around a bunch of people, men and women? I mean, the secular world, they're the same. The women have their version, the men have their version. But you know, they stand around, they tell these dirty jokes, and then they laugh like it's the funniest thing in the world. Or you go home and turn on the TV and you watch this comedy act on TV. You know, some of these modern sitcoms. You go to a stand-up comedian, you know, a show or something, and you listen to them, you know, telling their jokes and people laughing and cutting up and having a good time. And I don't know if it's just me, but I don't find any humor in any of that. You know, I can listen to that kind of stuff, and the dirty jokes, that's easy to understand why you don't want that. You know, that's just garbage, pure and simple. But even jokes that uses seemingly good language is full of hate, it's full of garbage, it's full of fluff. I mean, there's nothing in it that makes me laugh. I think this is what Solomon was talking about here in verse 2. You know, there's nothing wrong with a Christian going out and having a good time. That's not what Solomon's saying. You know, for a Christian to go out and, you know, fellowship with fellow Christians and, you know, joke around and laugh and cut up and everything, there's nothing wrong with that. You know, when we leave God out of the equation and we start digressing into the world around us, into the vulgarity and through all that other stuff that modern comedy seems to flourish in, it's nothing but crazy. He says, and of mirth, you know, that joy, that gladness that supposedly comes with that kind of humor. What doeth it? What does it accomplish? What is it? How does it fulfill your lives? You know, what does it give you that will give you fulfillment? Apart from God, it doesn't give you anything. Apart from God, it's just empty and it's vanity. He says in verse 3, I sought in mine heart to give myself unto wine. Uh-oh. Okay, now, if you really get into God's Word and study it, and God took me on like a 3-year lesson in this, where he brought me to the realization, first of all, I need to leave wine alone because he told me to. You know, and when I say wine, I'm talking about any alcoholic beverage. And you can also expand that into illicit drugs and anything that will fog your mind. But as you start going into God's word and you find out, not only does God tell you to avoid the appearance of evil, but he starts going in and he starts explaining to you if you really want to get into it, and you can find out that alcohol is not good.
Yeah.
So here's Solomon saying, I sought in mine heart to give myself unto wine, yet acquainting mine heart with wisdom. And so that's kind of, to me, that's kind of an oxymoron a little bit. How do you give yourself unto wine and yet still keep your wits about you? One of the things that Solomon was blessed with was a lot of intelligence. When he first took over the kingdom, God asked him, what do you want? And Solomon said, I just want to have enough smarts to be able to judge these people that you've given me. Well, God blessed him. I mean, he blessed them abundantly. And he gave them, arguably, he's probably the smartest man that's ever lived. So as he's going into this one avenue of supposed pleasure and joy, he's going into it with the mindset, I'm going to find out once and for all, what does the common man find so pleasurable in drinking alcohol? So he's acquainting my heart with wisdom. He's going to try to keep his wits about it. He's going to try to keep his thoughts right and explore it in a way that is scientifically based. Explore it in a way where he can find out once and for all, does this provide fulfillment? Or is it just empty vanity like I think it's going to be? He says, and to lay hold on folly. Folly is just another word for foolishness. Have you ever watched anybody after they've been drunk? They're just blooming idiots. I tell you what. I had an uncle, and he's passed on a few years ago. But when I was a kid growing up, I guess I was 12, 13 years old, he loved to drink. And me and my mom's family, we all got together. We had a great big old reunion, the first one in 10 or 15 years. And one of my aunts and uncles, they went out and bought a kegger of beer. And this uncle, bless his heart, he was so fallen down drunk that he couldn't stand up straight. But he thought he was having a good time. It was just foolishness.
Yeah.
He goes on and says in verse 3, he says, till I might see what was that good for the sons of men, which they should do under the sun all the days of their lives. Till I might see, in other words, until I might be able to inspect. He wanted to analyze this kind of behavior. He wanted to analyze, why is it people drink? He wanted to put it under the microscope and look at it. That I might see what was that good for the sons of man. In other words, to see what was that benefit, what was it that brought pleasure to people that do this. What was it that was agreeable to man in making them think that this was all right. He says, I'm going to explore this, which they should do under the heavens all the days of their lives. Solomon found out it was vanity. He found out that it didn't provide any benefit at all. He found out, just like, if we was to really look at it from God's perspective, there's a lot of things in life that people do that leaves you still feeling empty, that leaves you still unsatisfied. You can go out and you can have a good time one night, and the next morning, where you at? You wake up, you got this hangover, or your friends have gone off on their own little way, and you're all alone, and there's no fulfillment in that. We need to seek God in our life to get that fulfillment. Any thoughts or comments on that first section?
Hey Bruce, just something on your laughter section here. Humans are only species that can actually laugh. If anybody didn't know that, we are the only ones that actually laugh. But back in them days, they had, just like we had comedians, they had jesters. Mm-hmm. And the jesters came in before they came to make the king laugh. And how did they make the king laugh? By doing stupid things. Nothing that's sensible is funny. So that's why I think he's saying it's mad, because all they're doing is just foolish, stupid things to make him laugh. Just like you might watch on America's Home Funniest Videos, when someone falls down and gets hurt or does something bad, they laugh about it, and that hurts, but it's just basically stupid stuff. And I believe that's kind of more or less where they're pointing, why he's saying it's just madness, because we're laughing at stupid stuff, we're not laughing at anything it's anything to make us happy. It's just because we think it's stupid.
Well, and that could be a good part of it too.
And just on the wine thing, and I know about the wine like you know, but back in them days, they did wine because they didn't have all the medicines we have today. God gave us medicine now that we don't need alcohol to relieve the pain or to help us forget
Well,
the pain.
and you're right. If you look at the different ways that wine is translated in the Bible, there's like 2 or 3 different types of wine that it's translated from. Some of it is non-alcoholic. Some of it is medicinal. This wine here, if you go back and look at the definition of it, I think I'm right here. This one here is purely alcoholic.
Alcoholic, yeah.
And it's not for medicinal purposes. This is just for the folly and the drunkenness that it will give you. Any other thoughts or comments on that? Yes, sir.
Where it says pointed top pleasures and possessions don't bring lasting joy. About where our remote out swapping TV channels. About a month ago, I was swapping. It caught my attention about movie stars and people that were wealthy that committed suicide.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it had just come on about a 30-minute thing there, and it was showing different movie stars, different, like I say, wealthy people that, you know, you think, you're watching their movies, these comedies, which would make you laugh, you think, why would they commit suicide? You know, like, and it showed quite a few different ones, and it even showed Oprah that she went through like a 5-year depression.
Mm-hmm.
And you think, you know, she's a millionaire, multimillionaire, and all these, you know, are on TV channels. And why would a person go through a 5-year, I'm talking about deep depression? It just shows that it don't, as it says here, it don't bring the lasting joy.
That's right.
And those are just modern examples of what Solomon is proven in his
Amen.
text here in Ecclesiastes. Any other thoughts or comments on that section before we get to our next one? Okay, verse 4 now. Now in this section here, really keep in mind the wealth that Solomon had. Okay? He says, I made me great works, I builded me houses, I planted me vineyards, I made, you hear all the times it says I in this? I made me gardens and orchards, and I planted trees in them of all kinds of fruits. I made me pools of water to water therewith the wood that bring forth trees. All of these I's in this. Now, with his wealth, there's nothing he couldn't buy, nothing he couldn't obtain, nothing he couldn't purchase to bring this joy into his heart. One of the commentaries I was reading this week, and I don't know how much truth is in this, maybe there's a lot of truth, I don't know, but he said that maybe Solomon was trying to recreate Eden. Maybe he was. You know, if you go back and you know, read the first part of Genesis, before the fall of man, God created the Garden of Eden for man. And all Adam and Eve had to do was just to tend the garden, you know, take care of it. And, you know, modern man, we still find it pleasurable, a lot of us do, to get out into the dirt and you know, plant our gardens in the spring, you know, and work the soil and get our hands dirty. And that's enjoyable. It's relaxing. So maybe Solomon was trying to recreate that, I don't know. But one of the things that when we look at that, these are just different ways that man provides ourselves with the tools, resources, abilities that Satan uses to blind us to the will of God that can give us supposed pleasure. All of these things that the first 3 verses here, verses 4, 5, and 6, was things that Solomon did to bring pleasure to himself. It wasn't trying to benefit anybody else, it was just trying to bring pleasure and joy to himself. He says, in verse 7, he says, I got me servants and maidens, and had servants born in mine house. So, not only did he have all these possessions that he was bringing in, the orchards and the gardens and the flower beds and all this other stuff, the vineyards and all this other stuff, but he had people that could wait on him hand and foot. You know, all he had to do was to sit back in his easy chair, you know, sit back in his lawn chair, you know, get in that hammock, you know, and just direct people, you know, there's a weed over here, buddy. Go take care of that. It was just all vanity. But he's proven a point to us. If you really look at it, he's proven a point to us. All the wealth in the world isn't going to buy you happiness. He goes on and says, also I had great possessions of great and small cattle above all that were in Jerusalem before me. great possessions, that great and small cattle, they're just talking about different forms of livestock. The oxen and the sheep and the lambs and, the goats and all that stuff. And back in that day, a man's wealth was measured a great deal to how much livestock did he have? How many servants did he have? How big was his house and all these other sorts of things. Solomon was a rich man. And he was taking advantage of his wealth to try to get all these things for him. He says, I had great possessions, small cattle above all that were in Jerusalem before me. Verse 8, he says, I gathered me also silver and gold and the peculiar treasures of kings and of the provinces. There's nothing Solomon didn't have. And I keep harping on that to try to prove a point. Every day, just about every day, I hear people at work when we're standing around talking or we're waiting the clock out to go home. They start talking about the lottery. And they talk about how if I could just win the lottery. And this one gal, she always gets on the phone right about clock out time, and she looks at, here's a woman that won, $258 million. Oh, I wish I was her. What do? We go out, especially when that lottery starts getting up there into the hundreds of millions of dollars. There's some people who go out there and spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars trying to buy a lottery ticket so that they can make it big. But if you ever read the statistics on what happens to those people that do happen to make it big, and they win these lotteries, there's people that's won hundreds of millions of dollars. A few years later, 5 years, 10 years later, they're dead broke. They've got to go to bankruptcy court to get out of debt, and they're miserable. Money don't buy you anything.
Yeah.
He says in verse 8, he says, I got me men singers and women singers, entertainment, and the delights of the sons of men, as musical instruments, and that of all sorts. Now, I want to go into a little bit of depth about this musical instruments. When I was looking up the definition of that word, the definition of that word, that musical instrument is one word. The definition of that word is concubines. So I started thinking, wait a minute. The King James, and I love the King James. I wouldn't read any other version. The King James is, in my humble opinion, the only version of the Bible that's worth having.
Amen.
With that being said, though, I started questioning, well, am I looking up this word right? So I looked at, I've got one website that I usually go to look up definitions. I've got other resources that I can go to look up definitions. So I looked up this word in different avenues to try to make sure that I wasn't just misreading something. But everything I looked at said that word was translated concubines. So I went to the next step further than that. So I looked at different translations. Some of the translations uses the same that King James does, musical instruments. Some of the translations also uses words or words that are synonymous with concubines. So I start thinking in my mind, what is God trying to tell us with this? Now, we know if you go back and read, the story about Solomon in 1 Kings or some of these other books, Chronicles, that he had at one point 700 wives and 300 concubines. I was thinking in my mind, so maybe knowing that women back then had very little power, women back then was considered a possession of their husbands. Women back then had no rights. So maybe Solomon is treating his harem as nothing but a plaything, trying to use them to satisfy the physical appetites that the world says he needed to fulfill. I did some more research on this and come to find out that some of the old translations, and this is complicated by the fact that nowhere else in the Bible is this Hebrew word used. So Ecclesiastes chapter 8, or chapter 2, verse 8, that word is actually used twice. Once in the singular, once in the plural. Nowhere else in the Bible is it used. So when scholars, when they try to figure out what an ancient word means, they usually go and they look at everywhere in the Bible that word is used, so that they can kind of get an idea of how the context in which it's used to help them define what it means. We can't do that with this word. But if you go to writings outside the Bible, a lot of times that Hebrew word was used in the normal Hebrew dialect as talking about musical instruments. So, however you look at it, Solomon decided to pursue avenues that would bring physical pleasure to his life, either through singers, through entertainment. You know, maybe if it is true about the concubines, you know, certainly we know that he had a large harem. But it all talks about one thing. It talks about the pleasures of man, apart from the guidance of God. When I was reading this section, when I was studying this one section of Word, it came to my mind, God placed in my heart, Deuteronomy chapter 8, and there's quite a few verses that conveys this. You've got to really read the whole chapter in order to get the meaning of what I think God wants us to learn from this. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, I'm just going to kind of hit some highlights in that chapter. But this was a period of Israel's history where Moses was getting ready to die. He was giving the children of Israel the last moments of his life. He's giving them words of wisdom and understanding and instructions and you know, trying to pep them up and to trust in God and you know, doing what God would have them do. But he also gave them warnings. And he gave them things that they needed to avoid. He says in chapter 8, in verse 11, he says, beware that thou forget not the Lord. One of the things that Moses wanted to stress is that we need to keep God first in our lives.
Yeah.
We need to keep him foremost in our lives. He says in verse 14, then thine heart be lifted up and forget the Lord. Verse 17 says, and say in thine heart, my power and my might have gotten me this wealth. Do we ever say that? You know, we go and we get our secular jobs and we go out there and, you know, we kind of start raising up that ladder of success and we start getting up there the rungs of success and everything. And man, I've done good in my career. You know, look where I am. You know, it ain't about me. Even in the secular world, God is what gives us the ability to do what we do. If you go backwards and look at verse 10, it says, thou shalt bless the Lord. I'm talking about in Deuteronomy again. Thou shalt bless the Lord. Over in verse 18 of that same chapter, but thou shalt remember the Lord thy God, for it is he that giveth thee power to get wealth. All these things that Solomon was doing, all these things that he was buying, all these avenues that he was taking to explore the pleasures of life and to fulfillment in his life, he left out God.
Yeah.
Now, if we put God first, God will put that joy in our heart.
Amen.
He will put fulfillment in our lives. He will give us satisfaction. He will give us happiness. But it'll be done in the right way, not in the man's evil way. Any thoughts or comments on that section?
Of course I do, Bruce.
Of course you
that's
do.
That's a lot of information right there. But you know, you hit it right on the bottom, on the very end. You hit it on the T right there. You said, you know, at first you said all the wealth in the world could not make man happy.
Amen.
But Solomon was the wealth. He showed you the iitis of the rich. But we have the iitis of the medium class. I can't do this. I don't have money to do that. It's not feasible. I just don't know how. We have the same iitis. We just different levels of iitis. And you hit it right. We're all going to have iitis until we find the pleasure in the Lord.
Amen.
Nothing for the rich, for the poor, for anybody can be happiness without God.
That's right.
Amen.
Now, I really didn't read much on that Ecclesiastes, but when you're talking about the musical instruments, it says men and women. Of course, so it's both men and women. I think he's referring to bond servants, or we would call slaves. They call it bond servants because they volunteered to be the servant of them. But he's called bond servants as play toys, you know. And that's kind of I didn't have time to and what you were saying, and it says of all sorts. So I mean, it's applying to not just concubines is usually the woman, but the bondservant would be the man and the woman.
But you know, if you look at the definition of that, and I would welcome anybody else's study of that word to kind of help me understand, because I'm still a little foggy on exactly what God is trying to convey with that one word. But the fact that it's used twice, once in the singular, some of the commentaries I read that means in the singular it's talking about his wife, singular, you know, the one that they're calling the queen. And then the second time it's in the plural. So talk about multiple women or wives or concubines. So anyway, I don't know. I don't know.
I was just when you got, I just kind of was reading with trying to read what Ecclesiastes said and get the idea of what I can get out of that.
Trying to use it in the proper context.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions on that or that middle section? All right. Verse 9 now, Ecclesiastes chapter 2. He says, "So I was great and increased more than all that were before me in Jerusalem." Solomon recognized the power that he had obtained. He recognized the riches that he had obtained. He says, "Also my wisdom remained with me." So one of the things that twice now in this section, he's pointed out to his readers that one of the first and foremost focuses is, I want to make sure that I don't lose the wisdom that God has given me. I want to make sure that I'm going into these experiments with a mindset that says, it's just an experiment. I'm not going to let that control me. I'm going to control the experiment. He says in verse 10, "And whatsoever mine eyes desired, I kept not from them. I withheld not my heart from any joy. For my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my portion of all my labor." We say that, don't we? You know, if I just we see that nice car or that nice shiny pickup driving down the road, and oh man, I wish I had the money to buy that thing. And we just go into dreamland, you know. Solomon, if he saw something he liked, he got it. If he saw something he wanted, it became his. If he saw something or heard something, or had an idea about something that might give him pleasure, it was his. And he still found it vanity. Listen to what he says in verse 11. "Then I looked on all the works that my hands had wrought, and on the labor that I had labored to do, and behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit, and there was no profit under the sun, apart from God, without God at the center of our lives." Everything we explore, everything we do, everything we obtain, all the pleasures in life, it don't mean a thing without God in our lives. There's a passage over in 1 John chapter 2. It says this in verses 15 through 17. "Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world."
Amen.
Listen to this part. "And the world passeth away, and all the lust thereof. But he that doeth the will of God abideth forever." So in other words, that joy that we might get by in the world, or obtain in the world, or steal in the world, it's temporary. One day, this world is going to be wiped off clean. God's going to take this world like he would a dirty dish pan, and he's going to clean it and burn it and make sure it's sanitized, and he's going to clean it up. And then he's going to make a new heaven and a new earth. Everything that we supposedly find pleasure in on this world, apart from God, is going to be gone. You remember the story in the New Testament. I know I'm bad out of time. I've still got so many things going through my head here. Well, and I don't guess I'll go there because it just left me out. But the things of this world, they don't mean a thing.
That's right.
Apart from
Amen.
God. Any thoughts or comments on that last section there? Yes, sir.
Just a quick, I find it amazing. Solomon was the wisest man, and he was the richest, and he had everything that everybody here on this earth would want or desire. He had the fame, he had the glory, he had the money, he had it all. And yet, when he looked around and when he looked at his life and everything that he had, he said it's nothing but vanity and vexation of spirit.
Amen.
In this world, we try to get everything. I mean, the American dream is to be the best and to have it all, but yet they're missing out on what this world can't give them, and that's the Lord. They're missing out on God's peace, God's joy, and they don't know where to get it from.
And you know what happened? If you read the story of Solomon, even though he was the richest, he was the smartest man in history, he let the world, even though he was trying to pursue all this in a logical mindset where he didn't lose focus on where he was or who he was, the generations after him paid the price.
Yep.
Because the kingdom of Israel was divided. And it was no longer a single nation.
Yep.
The things that we do today, apart from God,
Yep.
we may not see the consequences of,
Amen.
but the generations behind us will.
Amen.
Any other thoughts or questions on that before we have our closing?
I think just like Solomon, so can we, when we start to think that we're so wise, and God can shine a light on us and say, hey, listen, your wisdom is just foolishness to me.
Amen.
So don't think that you're so wise, because we know what happened to Solomon.
Yeah.
Yep.
It was, and it, without a doubt, can happen to any of us.
Amen.
That's right.
That's right.
Any other thoughts or comments on this? All right, so let's look. Oh, yes, sir.
Just talking about Solomon's wisdom, him playing with the world. 1 Kings, chapter 11 tells about how when he got with these women and concubines, how they turned his heart away from God,
Yeah.
looked to their gods.
Yep.
When we play with the world, the Bible says we get burned.
That's right. If we play with fire, we're going to get burned.
Yep.
Absolutely. Don't matter, like Jeff said, it don't matter how smart you are. You're going to get burned.
Amen.
All right, so let's live it out. How do we apply this to our lives today? First of all, we need to make sure God is first. We need to make sure that the Lord is our focus. We need to give Him the glory for what we do in our lives. I got a couple more passages I want to read to you. Luke chapter 16, verse 13 tells us this. No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. Ye cannot serve God and mammon.
Amen.
If you try to divide your focus and say, well, I'm gonna go to church on Sunday mornings, I'm gonna do all this and carry my Bible and praise God and sing worship songs, but the rest of the week I'm gonna go out there and do this. You can't do it.
That's right.
You can't do it. I don't know if it says this in y'all's books or not, but it says memorize Philippians chapter 4, verses 4 through 7. Now, I'm not going to read all four of those passages, and I certainly don't have a mind good enough to memorize anything, but I wanted to point out a couple of verses in that really, to me, strikes home what this message is telling us this morning. Philippians 4:4 says, rejoice in the Lord always, and again I say rejoice. Verse 7 says, and the peace of God, which passeth all understanding, shall keep your hearts and your minds through Christ Jesus. In other words, if we put God first, if we rejoice in Him, if we lift Him up in our lives, He is our driving force. He is our master. He is the one that tells us where to go and how to go. He's the one that we rely on to give us that joy and that pleasure and that fulfillment. He says here that He will keep your hearts and your minds. He'll give you the power to stay focused if you want it. And then all we got to do is just praise God.
Amen.
Amen.
Just praise God.